Hello YouTube, this is the Icy Frost here with a bit of a foreword on this one before we actually get to the story proper, because due to the nature of what the story is, there may be a bit of an explanation required to understand better what it's about and all this. You may have seen a similar bit of an explanation on the fanfiction site if you came here from there. In that case, I'm probably not going to say anything that's new to you here, and you may use the annotation that should be visible right about now to skip this forward. To all others, let's cut to the chase here. The first thing to note about this story is that I came up with it quite a while ago, back when World of Warcraft was still in vanilla, in fact. That is, when there were no expansions out. As such, the world that this story takes place in is effectively like the world that used to be back in World of Warcraft, and not the one that's in the game today. Also, this story takes place over a fair number of years, to the point where you couldn't really consider it as just a moment in the past either, because it just doesn't fit on the timeline. So, an alternate timeline, an alternate universe, whatever you wish to consider it, go for it. As a side note to all of this, there are several common themes in fanfiction that you will not find any of whatsoever in this story, due to the timing of things. Things such as faction-aligned blood elves, Draenei, Worgen, or death knights of any colors or stripes, besides just plain old undead scourge minions, because obviously they weren't around yet by the time I was coming up with this one. I didn't feel like adding them in there along the way either. The second thing that may need some clarification, because it's quite relevant to the plot of this story, is my view on the whole aging and maturing of elven races in fantasy and how that generally works. Basically, you may have heard before that elves in fantasy tend to take so many hundreds of years and whatnot to mature and all this. And the way I look at that is that that's more of a social thing. The point being that it doesn't actually have anything to do with their physical growth, which I don't see why that should take much any longer than it does for a human. There are actually a number of reasons why it makes more sense to me to have it at about the same rate. I could go into these here, but I'm not going to, because that would take quite a while. If you disagree with it, then I can't really help you there, because the story is what it is. Now, as a final point of note before I let you into the story proper, is a request that I want to put out there. As of right now, I don't really have a whole lot of interesting visuals to put in with the narration of the story, images and all that. I have a few ideas, I have a few picture manipulations, photographs, whatnot, but it's nothing too amazing and there isn't much of it, so it's going to be very few things per video, if even one image or so. So, I'm basically putting out a call for anyone who would like to spend time doing something like this that would fit on these videos, whether it be a bunch of drawings or whatnot of scenes and characters and other things relevant to here, or whatever else you think might fit, as long as it's your own stuff. I would be happy to be on the receiving end of some of those and edit it into the videos after the fact, along with your name on it, of course, and links to your stuff and whatever else you might want. So a bit of a call for a cooperative effort on this one. Also, as a reminder, I am pretty bad at doing this kind of stuff, so in order to get on my better side, you really don't have to be all that good at it either. Just one thing that I would rather not put up is basically direct screenshots from the game, unless you've done something interesting with them, edited them in some way or whatnot. That's at least relatively obvious. With that said, I think it's time to get to the main business here, so I wish you an interesting time with this one. Some say that writing down your thoughts helps you forget. I say it's a lie. Either that, or I am some kind of a special exception in this matter too. By a loon, I hate that phrase. If you're reading this, know that it wasn't meant to be read by anyone, not even myself after I've finished writing it. This is my last desperate attempt to try and forget, to rid myself of the nightmares that haunt me. What are my dreams about then? Fire. Always fire. The fire that made me into what I am. But that wasn't the beginning. It's just the point that connects it all. The beginning lies in my childhood. So that's where I will start. If you're still reading this, hear my tale. I don't remember much about the first 3 years of my life, but I guess very few people do. My hometown was a fishing village called Orbadin. Contrary to popular belief, the only real fishermen in the town were random bypassers and travelers, not as night elves. As a child, I always liked to observe all the different people of several races moving around the pier and the inn, always some kind of business in mind. I remember I used to wonder why most of the townspeople were not at all excited to meet these strangers, and I soon found out the reason for that. It wasn't until I had turned 4 when my parents finally told me that a great battle had taken place at Mount Hyjal only 3 years before I was born. They told me of the great tree Nordrasil and how our leaders had been forced to sacrifice it, and the consequences of that event. Back then, it seemed impossible to me that our race had once been immortal. I guess I should have considered myself lucky for not having been there to see it. I have always loved the sea. I often spent entire days at the beach, swimming in the cool water and observing what was going on around me. Of all the people in the town, the only person I truly remember was the boy who was always sitting on top of a certain rock, fishing pole in hand. I don't know if he ever actually caught anything. I never saw him doing anything but waiting and sitting there like a statue. Even so, I always had a feeling that he was watching me. Some months after I had turned 4, I found the purpose of the large bell that was up in the lighthouse. It was the evening of yet another misty but peaceful day by the seaside. I was about to go to bed when I heard the bell. I looked out of my window to see that the townspeople were all racing around, some of them looking shocked. Some were pulling on their armor to join the ranks of the town guard who were gathering up by the moonwell. One glance towards the forest froze me on the spot. There were maybe 10 or 12 of them, and more poured out of the shadows. Furry horned satyrs. Even my child's mind could understand that the gods were not ready for this. I witnessed men and women fall in battle, saw as the satyrs used their fell magics to raise mindless undead skeletons from the corpses of the slain. And then there was a bang at the door. I heard my father go to the door and yell something. Then there was a loud crash as someone broke inside, followed by a terrible scream. That was the last sound my father ever made. Mother came into my room, looking terrified. 2 skeletons and a satyr followed her in, their weapons already coated in blood. "Leave my daughter alone," I remember her yelling. As if talking to demons would ever do any good. What followed was not a fight, it was a slaughter. Then the demon and its minions turned their views toward me. I was ready to faint on my bed. Then something strong clutched my arm from behind. The next thing I knew was that someone had just pulled me out of the window of my room. That someone was now dragging me along the pier towards a boat. The townsfolk had arranged a boat to take civilians into safety across the sea to Teldrassil. When my savior pushed me on board, I saw his face. It was the same boy who was always fishing at the beach. Without another word, he turned around and hurried back into the night. A few moments later, the ship's deck under my bare feet jerked sideways as it began its journey. I remember looking over the side as the flames appeared. One after another, the buildings that made up the silhouette of the town were engulfed in them. After a while, fire was all that I could see in the horizon. Unbelievable as it may sound, I have a faint memory that I let out an animal-like roar of helpless rage, one that belonged to some wild beast and not the little girl I was. And I felt something wake up inside me. Then came tears. My face, which bore no markings or tattoos or any kind, was quickly wet with them as I sat in the corner of the ship's deck. I think it took me an hour or 2 to fall asleep. I dreamed of fire. I'm not sure what woke me up. Was it the warm breeze of air, the shaking of the ship as it came to a halt, or all the sounds made by the people on board as they started to disembark? I was still half sleeping when my feet hit the ground again. At first, I decided to go with the flow of people, not really knowing what I was supposed to do. We walked right through the beautiful city of Darnassus, but I wasn't looking. My body was sore and my limbs numb. There was a cleaving, empty feeling in my stomach. But those, and my clothes that had gotten quite ragged during the last 12 hours, were the least of my concerns. By the time we reached the city's gates, there were hardly anyone of the people I had followed in sight. I was alone. Exhausted, I sat against a large tree just outside the gates, by the side of the road that led out of the city. Then my sorrow and despair overcame my will to go any further. I lingered on the edge of consciousness for 2 full days. At noon on the 3rd day, I heard a clear voice speak to me. "You don't seem to be very well, child. Allow me to help you." I opened my eyes to see a man crouching in front of me, his face almost at the same height as mine. Even though both his skin and his long straight beard were deep blue, they didn't mix into each other. The glow in his eyes was dimmer than any other night elf I had seen, and its color reminded me of brass rather than silver. He was wearing a robe that looked very complex, but not expensive or formal. It was wooden brown, with stripes and lines of green all over it. In his left hand, he held a long wooden staff that had a tiny branch growing on one end. At first, I thought I was dreaming, and decided to ignore him. But then he repeated what he had just said. I looked him in the eyes for a long time. He had the kind of tranquil air to him that even a goblin would have trusted him. "What is your name?" I didn't even consider lying to him, even though he was a stranger. "Kalia," I managed to mutter.